Hello again, everyone. I'd like to take a few moments here and note the passing of a man who I regard as a true hero, a real mensch. This guy had the right stuff. I'm talking about Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov. He was an officer in the Soviet Air Defense Missile Command, or whatever, missile defense. And on the morning of September 26th, 1983, he was a duty officer in a secret bunker somewhere outside Moscow. And he was monitoring with his crew, with his guys. He was monitoring the early warning system. It's something called the OCO early warning system. And the OCO system was new. We just put it into place, and it's a satellite, a constellation of satellites, several satellites of Soviet manufacture, of course. Here's one here. They got that big long snout of a telescope, and they're looking for American missile launches against the Soviet Union. I mean, that wasn't the only line of defense. There was a ground radar, and there's a couple of others. But the satellite would give you a really early warning at the moment of launch, whereas radar had to wait till the missiles got up over the horizon. That satellite would lock onto the launch and tell you right away that something's up. Well, that's exactly what happened. It was just past midnight on the morning of September 26th. The satellite, the OCO system, detected an American missile strike against the Soviet Union. And alarms are going off, bells are going off, whistles, klaxon, woo, 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 and whatever. And all hell broke loose. And it was Petrov's job with his guys to monitor the launch, determine what's going on, and then pick up the phone and call back to headquarters, probably in the Kremlin, and advise them that this was what's happening, there's a launch, and go ahead and launch a counterstrike. Well, that's what probably everybody else would have done, except Colonel Petrov. He said, wait a minute. You know, he kept a cool head while everybody else, the bedlam was going on around him. He kept a cool head because he said he had a feeling in his gut that something wasn't right. There's a number of things. For one thing, he was always been told, and this is the way he was trained, that if the Americans ever launched a missile strike against the Soviet Union, it would be a lot of missiles. And here it was only 5. 5 isn't very many when they could launch, 50 or maybe even 100. I don't know how many, but a lot. The second thing was when he waited a few minutes for the ground radar, because that's what they had to do. They were trained at, okay, wait to see, other systems pick it up, because we got to have verification. We just can't go with satellites. We got to go with the radar, and so the radar wasn't picking it up. He waited, and nothing was happening, because after 5 minutes or so, the missiles should come up high enough that the radar could pick them up, and it didn't. There's a couple of other factors involved, and one of them was that the OCO system was new, and they had had some glitches. There had been some, during testing, there had been some things going wrong with it. They tried to tweak it, and it just wasn't responding too well. They had to iron out some real problems with it. So he figured those 3 things in particular. Only 5 missiles, no ground radar, and the system would malfunction at times. So he held his fire, and he told everybody, wait, he's not calling the Kremlin. And the missile flight would take like 20 minutes or something to hit the Soviet Union. And after 23 minutes, everybody stopped holding their breath and exhaled. It was a malfunction of the system. Now keep in mind that now this was September 26th, 1983. Well, on September 21st, 1983, Korean Airlines flight 007 was shot down over Sakhalin Island, and with a loss of 269 lives. And it was shot down by a Soviet pilot flying a Sukhoi Su-15. And here's a map of the airliner where it went off its track westward. It was followed by, closely followed by another Korean Airlines. They both were 747s. Followed by flight, I believe it was KAL 015. And 015 stayed on this track. Well, again, looking at the map, you can see the dotted line. That's where they should have gone. But 007 strayed westward and went over Kamchatka province, Kamchatka Peninsula and Sakhalin Island, and was shot down. And there had been a lot of fooling around. Americans had been pushing these spy planes, these surveillance planes, and nudging that area. So the Russians, it was at night, the Soviets, they didn't know what it was, whether it's a civilian airliner or whether it was another U.S. spy plane. So they shot it down. So tensions were on high alert. So I don't know whether Colonel Petrov took this into account or not, that maybe this was retaliation for shooting down the Korean Airlines, although it would have been, way over the top retaliation. It turns out that the Korean Airlines the pilots had just screwed up. It was pilot error. They'd put in the wrong coordinates and hadn't double checked them. And it went over Soviet territory. But anyway, that just gives you an idea that back at that time, tensions were really on edge. And then not too long later, that Able Archer, another big, huge military exercise that the U.S. and NATO used to run in Europe. And Able Archer, there's several of those war games, and they almost got us into a war themselves. So, but anyway, what's interesting is that, to me, is that Petrov held his fire. It turns out I think what happened is the satellite picked up the telescope, right? Picked up a series of ice formations, ice clouds in the upper atmosphere, and mistook them for missile plumes, the engine exhaust, motor exhaust off a rocket. And here's a picture of a cirrus cloud, or this is a Cirrus Uncius, which is what we call mare's tails. And here I've circled the heads of the mare's tails in blue, so you can see, and here's coincidentally there's 5 of them. And in that concentration in the head, see the ice formation. And with the sunlight hitting it at a certain angle, that'll light it up, have a prismatic effect, and it'll glow red, orange and red. Here's another picture of Cirrus Uncius, and as you can see, again, I circled the heads in blue. That's just my personal opinion of what the OCO satellite picked up. It couldn't distinguish between that dense formation of ice crystals with the sun hitting it at the precise angle and lighting it up red. So they say, whoa, red, 5 plumes, five rockets. That may be what happened. That's just my, personal assumption. Colonel Petrov, interestingly enough, was neither reprimanded nor was he rewarded. Shortly afterward, he retired. He took a retirement, and apparently he had some kind of mental or emotional problems for a while. And it took him a while to sort it out, because in his mind, he'd saved the world from a global catastrophe. And he was thinking, if there'd been anybody else in that bunker, the duty officer, they were trained to follow orders, like military army. And he was the guy that just said, wait, something feels funny here about this. But he said if it had been somebody else, we might have, we might not be here. And, would that have happened? It's really hard to say, but I kind of doubt it, because for this reason. Let's say a duty officer did pick up the telephone and said, Comrade General, somebody in the Kremlin, Comrade General, the Americans have launched a strike against us. Well, how many? Well, it's 5 missiles. Well, okay. How about ground radar? Well, nothing on ground radar so far. And I think the people in the Kremlin would have made the same decision, because there wouldn't have been just one general. There would have been a bunch of guys trying to make the decision whether to launch a counterstrike. And there would have been an argument and a discussion, and the generals in the Kremlin. And they would have come to the same conclusion Petrov did. We got to have ground radar. And if the radar isn't showing up, it ain't right. Because that's a big, heavy thing to launch missiles against the United States. In truth, the Soviets and the Russians at the time, they liked the United States. They liked the people. Not necessarily the government, but they liked the people. And like I've said many times before, Russia and the United States are not natural enemies. So there's none of that visceral hatred that you'd find between, say, Germans and Russians, or Germans and Poles, or Chinese and Vietnamese. So the Russians would say, wait a minute, let's just think this through. And I think that the generals in the Kremlin would have done the same damn thing that Petrov did. That's just my personal opinion. And again, it would have had to, the decision would have to probably go all the way to the top anyway. So, but that's, in any case, despite all that, Petrov was a true hero, because he just stopped it right there. He didn't let it go outside the bunker. But I think there's a larger lesson to be learned here. There's a larger point to take away from all this. And you really have to stop and think about it. Because let's say Colonel Petrov did prevent a nuclear holocaust, simply because something didn't feel right in his gut. It was a subjective conclusion on his part. And he looked at the evidence and he said, whoa, 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 wait, something ain't right here. But in the future, and in the near future, in the next 10 years or 20 years, we'll be handing all this decision-making over to the machines, artificial intelligence. And the decisions will be made by the machines, by the artificial intelligence. And they'll sort through all the information, and the computer, the artificial intelligence, will make the decision whether to launch the missiles or not. And in truth, the machines are created by humans, and they have the same flaws as humans. No matter how you think this artificial intelligence is superior to humans, no, it's not. Because it's designed by humans, it's created by humans, programmed by humans, and it can be hacked by humans. And there's no, an AI computer, the brain, it won't have a feeling in its gut. It just makes objective decisions. Boom, 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 boom. It's all quantitative. Nothing like Petrov is qualitative. It's all quantitative. 2 and 2 equals 4, 4 and 4 equals 8, 8 and 8 equals 16, and there's no room for error. And Petrov said, 2 and 2 doesn't equal 4. It equals 5 or 3 or something, here. It ain't right. And that's a problem. To hand over this decision whether we live or die to artificial intelligence. I probably won't be here to see it. Hopefully I won't. Hopefully I'll be off this planet before that decision is made. But it gives us something to think about, Colonel Stanislav Petrov really gives us something to think about. And in my mind, he is a true hero. He should have received, the Order of Lenin or some damn thing for what he did. Why he wasn't rewarded was because if they would have given him something, then they would have had to punish the designers of the system because clearly there was a flaw. So they'd have revealed the flaw, and whoever, screwed it up, and like we say, screwed the pooch, would have suffered the consequences. So they just fixed it and let everything die down, let Petrov go off and do whatever he did. Later he became, this didn't come out until quite a while ago, not quite a while ago, just recently, I think 2009 or 2000 somewhere, where finally a general said, yeah, that's what happened. And Petrov was some of these anti-war groups, the peace groups. He was made a minor celebrity. He went around and received some small cash prizes, some awards and whatever. And sadly enough, what's particularly sad is we didn't know he died until, he died in May 19th. And we didn't know about it until just a couple, 3 days ago. And that's not right. I mean, right there, the guy should have, somebody should have said something. It should have been in the Russian media. But even today, even in the Russian media, as open as it is, somebody should have said something. But I don't think it was deliberate. I think it was just ignored. That was part of the Cold War. Let's not go back and revisit it. And now we got a new Cold War coming up, and that's even less reason to go back and visit the old Cold War. It just stirs things up. So, but anyway, I wished I could have met the man. That's a regret of mine. That one of my thousands of regrets. But I wish I could have met the guy and shook his hand. And just thanked him for his courage. The fact that he remained cool-headed under tremendous pressure, and the fact that he bucked his superiors. He went against the grain. He questioned the orthodoxy. And yeah, he deserves our credit. He deserves to be remembered. Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov.